Welcome to Ocmaya, the Global Paradigm Expansion Project. This is another exemplary expository piece that's called or titled Nature, Nurture, and Chance. And this should show us how human beings and their outcomes, so how human beings themselves are shaped, and how their decisions, their actions, their way of looking at their environment are shaped, and then obviously that these impacts human and individual and collective outcomes. So this should be placed in the second part of the museum exhibition. If you haven't seen the video of the floor plan, then you can check it out. This would be the second exhibition called The Influence, or part of the second room. And this has the aim of showing that we have a collective paradigm and that it's influenced by specific ways of viewing the world. Here, the main goal is that I show you that people are actually very, very influenced by what we will call nature, or refer to as internal factors, and nurture, which are referred to external factors, and chance, which is referred to as kind of everything else, right? So things that we cannot explain, but we can observe and we know exist. And the main point is that here you will understand that we have a huge influence of the way we view the world, and from a lot of scientific perspectives that sometimes are still being taught, or at least are still being relatively known or widespread. And also, I want to foreshadow some of the further expository pieces. So there will be more pieces definitely on strategy, there will be more pieces on epigenetics, there will be more pieces on psychology. So this is just like an overview to accept that science has different ways of looking at how we are impacted by our, by nature, nurture, and chance, right? And a disclaimer is this: the way that I categorize this, nature, nurture, and chance, is not scientifically or does not have a scientific consensus. There is no consensus, really. There is no forest view of the different scientific fields and their specific viewpoints or schools of thought for all science. This is really simplified, and this is open for multiple interpretations. So please be aware of that. I'm not making the case that this is an absolute truth. It's just for learning knowledge, or for learning to accept that we are heavily shaped, heavily influenced, right? And to provide some kind of structure that allows us to see that throughout history, science has kind of changed because it acknowledges limitations, and it goes into looking at the next frontier, if you will, or the next challenge. So let's start with nature. So these are innate internal factors that we look at for different disciplines, starting with psychology, then going into biology, then management science, and then classical economics. So let's get to it and start with psychology. So there are schools of thought of psychology that you could call instinctivism. So essentially it states that you have some kind of reactions that you are born with, and these reactions obviously could be manipulated, could be trained, right? So in reality, this is obviously more complex, right? Nonetheless, within instinctivism, it just provides framework that without training or some kind of learning, when presented in a dangerous situations, you have three possible reactions that are natural, if you will. So one is fight, which doesn't necessarily mean that if you're under a stress situation that you will start kicking the crap out of someone, right? It may be that under a stress situation you don't hesitate and help. So this is an active moving forward into danger, if you will. Flight is an active going away from the danger, and freeze response is doing nothing, being unable to move, right? So because of panic, if you will. And obviously this is a huge topic. I'm just showing that the point is that the explanation of the behavior of a human being is innate. You were born with it, and you essentially have it and carry it with you. In genetics, this is also another very, very popular point. And in classical genetics, based from Mendel, for example, you can see that there are certain characteristics and conditions that are dictated by your parents, essentially, and their genes, and the way that this combine and mix. And this leads to observable patterns like eye color and hair color and hair type and size of the nose, etc., etc. So this is, I think, pretty clear. What's maybe not so clear is that diseases and conditions are sometimes very much hereditary, like color blindness. There is an island in the Pacific called Pingelap, where many people have procreated in the last decades and centuries, and many of them carried a gene of achromatopsia, so color blindness. And in this island, you have a substantial amount of people that have achromatopsia, that are colorblind, because mostly it's genetic. In management, you could say that internal factors could be based on something called the resource-based view, where you have some kind of valuable, rare, difficult to imitate, and non-substitutable resources, which can generate some kind of great outcomes for your organization. So one very big trend is the war for talent. So essentially, an expert that has a very good grasp on artificial intelligence, or something like a high-functioning team that has very good knowledge, and they can work very good with each other, providing really good outputs, and so it's difficult to imitate. It's rare, the chemistry of a good team, and so on. So this is an internal factor, so something in the company. Obviously, it's not only innate, right? So you could actually pay people that are very, very good at something to actually generate this kind of resources. So again, this is not completely meant that it's an absolute truth, but nature here is interpreted in this model as something that is within your innate, within your structure. And another example is financial superiority. Right? So if you have more money, then it's even more possible or easier to get intellectual capital through war of talent and so on. Now, there are tons of examples where financial superiority obviously does not automatically lead to better outcomes. That's not what I'm saying, very important. What I'm saying is that financial superiority could lead to actual better outcomes under the conditions that they create some kind of good resources and capabilities that the corporation can then turn into amazing value offerings. And in classical economics, so this is before the comparative advantage for the economists amongst us. So this is just the origin of specialization within the idea of classical economics, work of Adam Smith. It shows the notion that people have some kind of skills, and these skills will lead you to your profession. Right? So if you have an absolute advantage, if you're more efficient than someone else at being a butcher, then it probably makes sense if you focus on being a butcher based on these talents. That again can be increased through learning. So one cannot say that this is completely nature, completely internal. But bear with me, the idea or the original idea, for example, when you start your career or when you decide what you want to do is based on your talents, or should be based on what you are good at. Okay. So we can see that with these examples that nature can play a significant role, but it doesn't have the ability to explain all actions and behaviors. So thus we go to nurture. So nurture here is more external factors, learning, and also the same disciplines, or at least more or less the same disciplines. Psychology, you have what you could say is the opposite spectrum of human behavior is behavioralists, like B.F. Skinner or Pavlov, where you have some kind of learning. Themselves, they wouldn't call it conditioning, right? The scientists, they would call it learning. And this learning could be classical, where there is an association like Pavlov's dogs between an action towards a reaction. And this is obviously not the psychological jargon, but it's just the way that classical conditioning occurs. It's all about creating association, for example, between ringing the bell and a steak, and then a reaction that the dog has that's not conscious, that will start associating the bell with food, and then will start having a bit more saliva. So, and the operant conditioning, this is the one that we use quite a lot. So this is still used, by the way, the classical conditioning is still used in things like consumer behavior and advertising. So it's not completely irrelevant today. Operant conditioning, this is the Skinner kind of approach, where you have reinforcements, have negative reinforcements, so they would never see it as punishment. And positive reinforcements, which they would never see it as rewards. They just see it as some kind of positive, pleasurable reaction that would cause a behavior to continue, to be done again and again. And we see this every time, right? Even in our relationships, right? We have this: if you don't do this, then you must face the positive, typically the negative reinforcement, right? Or if you do this, you get the positive reinforcement. And obviously in organizations, it's very widespread, right? So if you achieve your targets, then you get your bonus or whatever. If you come late a lot, then you'll be fired. This is very much entrenched in our society, and it was already obviously something that happened even before Skinner, but Skinner developed a bit more formality. Now in biology, I cannot say this is purely biology, the idea of neural plasticity, which is something relatively new. And neural plasticity essentially means that the brain has this amazing power of using certain regions that are not meant for certain specific tasks and reprogramming them so that you can actually help other regions that they may be damaged. And this happens, or the plasticity of the brain is kind of like a rewiring that is difficult to explain, and it's clearly onset through external factors, for example, through meditation and learning. So obviously you can make it a point internally to make the decision to meditate, right? So it's not completely, again, to say this is purely external factors or nurture, but still the idea of learning is not innate, right? So you have an external factor. And accidents, well, there are these amazing cases like people who get on accidents and then start speaking languages that they didn't know, or get on accidents and they start remembering things that they couldn't remember before, right? So it's a really very big and complex topic where the behaviors and the actions and the way that we interpret the world and memories are based on a specific event that occurs that then leads the brain to react. Within management, again, it's not completely to say nurture, it's not completely external, but one could say that the market-based view is, in management, states that the environment will have a better depiction, a better description of the outcomes of the organization than the people that work in it and the people that work in the organization. So, for example, if a market is very attractive, if you are a company during the pandemic that deals with online communication, that's going to be very important. It's going to be a very attractive market because a lot of companies are looking for ways to communicate without without meetings or personal meetings. And obviously, this goes way much further. All of these go way further than what I'm explaining. It's just to show you that the outcomes of an organization, so the collective outcomes of individual actions, then are based through environmental factors and positioning. So the way that you want to place your company in the market. This is probably not the best way to look at it, but there are other ways. But here, for example, you may say, well, I want that my company is known as the best of both worlds, right? So, for example, a car company that is fun to drive and is also elegant, right? And this is a true case scenario, but I don't want to involve any real companies. So there was a German car company that positioned themselves in a straddle strategy, so between best of both worlds, and essentially took some people, some customers from those who had elegant cars, but they were not fun to drive, and those who had fun driving cars, but didn't really shout elegance. So just as a small example. So this is the way that you react to your external, and the way you react to your external point, then this the best, right? And finally, in economics or classical economics, you have some kind of negative feedback loop. So essentially, and again, this cannot be only viewed as nurture. I want to make it as clear as possible. But depending on the situation, the environmental situation, you have essentially maybe too many pizza shops in your town and not enough people, then probably you need to close pizza shops because they'll probably need to go out of business. And the other way around, if you have, I don't know, frozen yogurt or bubble tea shops in a bubble tea craze, then typically what you expect are more bubble tea shops, right? That would then bring the whole thing into equilibrium. And obviously, again, the supply and demand and where they come from are going to be a very important part of the museum exhibition. So this is going to be much more detailed. But we can say that all these factors, including the feedback loops, including the management view, including the behaviorist view, and so on, that they are essentially external, and that they do play a role, or that they could be seen as external, and that they do play a role in the outcomes. But again, some of these, or actually all of these, are too oversimplified. So this means that they don't explain every situation. They don't explain every human behavior. So psychology doesn't explain every human behavior. Neuroplasticity obviously doesn't explain all behavior. Market-based views don't explain all outcomes of all organizations, and these doesn't explain the outcomes of all markets. So what could we say? Well, these are generalized views for a specific population. So for a specific set of actions. So in psychology, specific behavior, right? Why people actually do or act like they do, and so on and so forth. Still within the view of generalized behavior, but in actually using both nature and nurture, we can see that science has also created other ways of looking at things, at interpreting our worlds, and this includes both the aspect of nature and nurture and their interplay. One of these is multidisciplinary, so you cannot necessarily say that this is from a specific topic, right? From the categories that we have in science. It's not necessarily the way to look at it. So you have some issues from psychology, from behavior, from biology, sociology, and so on. And CBS is just a multidisciplinary approach that explains behaviors like procrastination and how to overcome them based on a process that identifies or makes the person aware of their own limitations, their own identification of why these problems arise, like procrastination. This identification could be that they're overwhelmed, they don't have time, the tasks were not explained sufficiently well, so the environmental aspect is not necessarily very good, or in terms of the emotions that are negative, the innate aspect is not very good, right? So it could be one of both, or both together, and then you would need to develop actions that would make this better, that would solve these causes of your procrastination. Like you would be more active and asking for more detailed feedback of what you need to do for the task, or you can, for example, break down the task into complex tasks into smaller parts, right? If you feel overwhelmed, if you feel negative, that you can talk about what makes you feel negative about it and focus on positives. And promoting mindfulness is like sharpening the tool kind of approach from Stephen Covey. So essentially, you have to do this continuously. So it's even though it seems to be more individual, it doesn't necessarily include the complexity of the human being. So it just looks at nature and nurture. This is important for the next for the idea of chance. Now, I would say that the next point of nature and nurture, so that we understand that science has been able to identify other aspects that look at some kind of bigger complexity. So a kind of bigger picture. So this is extremely important. It's looking that not only nature plays a role, but also nurture, and that both can actually impact them is what I would say is still biology. Maybe others can interpret this as multidisciplinary, is the field of epigenetics. And this is not really only an example of epigenetics. So I can read the scientific definition of this, but I think through an example, it will be better to understand how science has evolved, and through essentially chance has seen that genes can actually be influenced by the environment. So genes can actually, or gene expressions can actually activate or deactivate based on the environment, right? So it's not as clear cut as saying, yes, I have the gene for blue eyes and that's it, right? So all genes are going to be independent of the environment that I'm in. Essentially, that's not true. Right? The environment actually causes genes to activate or deactivate. And in 1945, there was a Dutch famine. So in the Netherlands, there were a lot of people that were had grave food insecurity. This was before the war was over and before the Allies could free the Netherlands. And the famine was very, very well documented, so that the people who participated in the famine, specifically people that were pregnant, so obviously women that were pregnant, and specifically pregnant in the second trimester, who went through this months of famine in 1945, that they, through this lack of nourishment, the gene expressions of the people, the babies, of the embryos, and here I place some genes. I have no intention to say that I'm a biology expert. These are the genes that I could find that were either activated or deactivated that made the babies super in saving calories. So obviously to ensure that the babies would survive, we would need a gene setting or gene expression that saves calories as much as possible. And what's amazing in epigenetics is that these people have lived with these genes all their lives, which has led to obesity, obviously. So they have the most amazing calorie saving system that humans can have. And not only that, these gene expressions have been passed into new generations. So the babies born in 1946, end of 1945, have then babies of their own, and they also have these gene expressions. So here we see that by expanding the view of not just simply stating, well, it's it's nature and nurture, but having a more holistic view, we can explain better what happens. In management, again, this is going to be a way more in detail in further exhibitions. But in contemporary strategic management, you never only focus on your resources, and you never only focus on the markets you're in. So you have this commonly, and I would say commonly misused and misinterpreted SWOT analysis, strengths and weaknesses that you have in your own internal world, if you will, and the opportunities and threats that you have in your external world, then will impact the process of strategy. So strategy is way more than this process. This is again another topic, but this will have an impact in your planning, setting goals, doing your plans, implementation, and how you control things. Right? So it just generates a focus where you, based on these, that you provide a direction for the organization, typically in a linear manner. And this is obviously now the standard, right? So this just focusing on resources is not necessarily widespread or on markets. Then we have comparative advantage. Comparative advantage is the idea that the production of something, if you consider that people will trade what they're producing, and this is a very, very simplified version with no prices and so on, right? So just what people would call the one-factor model or Ricardian model. And the idea is that you have people with some abilities or endowments that they could produce a certain amount of corn or get a certain amount of fish. And other people are better at endowments. They can produce better corn and better fish only purely through their labor, right? So again, this is completely oversimplified. It's not only labor that causes all of these. But the idea is you have both the internal factors of the people, so my internal abilities are taken into account, but also the global, the holistic view of the production, and through that, then people can actually consume more without producing more. Right? So the allocation, typically some kind of specialization of goods would take place, and then people would have more fish, more corn, both of them under very specific conditions. Doesn't mean that everyone will profit from trade. It just means that under certain conditions, people can profit from trade. And this nature and nurture is more or less the status quo of what we have in science. This is at least in the collective paradigm. So I think many people will have seen some of these scientific models up to this point, and they probably know of some of these scientific models. But the idea is that they are, like I have said before, more of generalized for the population. So these are still generalized for the population. So they're not taking into account any kind of specific individual context in the sense of the human being as being a complex being. So in this sense, for example, the SWOT analysis shouldn't really matter who does it. The SWOT analysis should have the same result or more or less similar result. Here, obviously, it does matter based on your endowments, but it's still not complex enough where we have all kinds of different dimensions. So this is just one dimension in a world of 4 dimensions. So it's not very, very good. Epigenetics is really good, really great, but it still doesn't necessarily always say about all the individual diseases or propensities to that, and so on and so forth. Which leads us to the next frontier, or what I call the next frontier is tailor-made for individuals. And this is something that we don't know a lot about. So 2 things. Scientists don't really know a lot about chance. So we know that it exists. We know that it's chance is just another way of saying there are billions of variables that have an impact that could lead to emergence or unpredictable situations. Right? So we understand that there are some things that exist, and we understand the models that provide some propensities, but we don't understand the entirety of the complexity. That's the main issue. And we have 2 examples, clinical depression, for example. Clinical depression has a part of nature, so some people are genetically predisposed to depression, but typically depression is onset through external events, typically very harsh external events like losing loved ones. And these harsh external events could lead to depression. But we don't know if a specific external event paired with a specific gene will lead to depression in a specific person, because that's the final frontier. The individual, we cannot predict the individual case. Similar in cancer research, while it is possible to predict the case for knowing that a specific amount of people will get cancer in a specific nation and prepare for that, right? So based on probabilities, we cannot say that cancer will actually occur in a specific individual. This has been a kind of misleading, because the research based on looking at the sheer numbers, so it seems that obviously there will be more cancer where there are more stem cell replication, right? So it's just a matter of probabilities. The more you do a thing, the more you're propensed to do mistakes of it, right? But it's not so simple to say that this will essentially just completely be luck, right, or chance. So it's the interplay of billions of variables that essentially cause some kind of errors in the replication of stem cell DNA or stem cells, and it's not to say that people are just lucky or unlucky to get it or not to get it. And still very important, it means that while some people, like former Chancellor Helmut Schmidt, could have smoked hundreds of thousands of cigarettes or millions of cigarettes, still died at 90, whatever, it doesn't mean that everyone will not die who smokes. So it's just simply more complex, and the only real honest view is that we still don't understand it. And because we still don't understand it, the best strategy is still prevention. And it's still just doing millions and millions and millions of tests to see if a specific person has cancer and act upon it as fast as possible. In contemporary risk management, we also accept that we cannot predict the future, right? The best laid plans of mice and men, they go awry. And we cannot predict the future, so corporations can embrace this unpredictability. For example, they look at interconnectedness, they look at possible small events that could lead to great impact in the future, like weak signals, or something like the ship that got stuck in the Red Sea, right, in the Suez Canal. So essentially, you're continuously looking for things that you can't predict, but maybe even through risk management or scenario management, you could have some kind of readiness to that. And obviously, some corporations want to achieve sustainability, and they are proactively not waiting for the risk to happen, but like, for example, the whole point of, or one of the main points of the trilogy of books from Nassim Taleb is to essentially say, well, risk can actually be good, right? So positive risk could lead to much better outcomes. And we have a relatively modern view of complexity economics. Here I'm just doing the example of Ricardo Hausmann in terms of the visualizations, complexity economics. Things tend to emerge, and the outcomes are relatively unpredictable, but it's an interplay of billions of variables. Right? In the case of Ricardo Hausmann in complexity economics, he has something that is simplified as the Scrabble theory, where countries that have specific know-how, not only knowledge, but actual dexterity, let's say, to do things, they can be represented as letters, and obviously the more letters that you have means the more dexterity that you have in people, then the more products and the more complex products that you can create. Now, this is again a very big topic, and it doesn't only focus on nature and nurture. It focuses on the billions of variables, and can eventually create some kind of understanding of why some countries are developed. And not only that, for example, in complexity economics, why within some countries there are small towns or regions or communities that have a GDP per capita like developed economy, and other within this exact same institutions, like exact same freedom of the press, exact same currency, exact same legal framework. You have others that are way, way, way more efficient, even in the same nation, right? So this is, if you are interested, you just look for Ricardo Hausmann, you'll find all kinds of views on complexity economics. But this is essentially the next frontier. This goes beyond this relatively reduced version of the world. Now, this would be kind of the end of the exhibition. But for the sake of understanding modularity, I will provide only three so whats, right? So what? Right, we have all these nice, or maybe not so nice, I don't know, things and icons, but what? So what? Why do I care for my company or for my person? Well, there are three things. First of all, we have a collective paradigm. I'm pretty sure that most people will have the notion of linearity, will have a notion of saying, well, there is this cause and effect, and you will probably have heard tons of people saying, well, oversimplifying things, like saying, well, obviously, if we invest more money, then we will have more returns, right? Or obviously, if we sell more, then we will have higher profits, things that actually are not always found in the real world and that are very mechanical. So they are not typically non-linear, these ideas of nature or nurture that are very widespread, they typically lend to some kind of very limited views of the world, and they hinder creativity. This is specifically important for those companies that are very, very, very much standardized, very much having a type of linear kind of production, and then want to implement agile methodology or design thinking or so. So they will obviously kind of crash. Also very important, human-centric methodologies. Well, we are all different, and there are some views that state that humans are kind of constants in an organization. So, for example, I've seen some Ivy League lectures that state that complexity emerges when a company is too big. I would like to challenge that and say complexity is already found in an individual. It's just very difficult to come up with management that acknowledges the complexity. Right? Companies have some kind of big plan that it's kind of machine-based or mechanic, where people are more like cogwheels, and if someone gets fired or someone essentially quits, then you find someone to fill that position, right? So the cogwheel must be reinserted so that you have a well-functioning, well-oiled machine. Human-centered approaches do not have that. So essentially, the human-centered approach would be that the integration of a specific individual would actually change the corporation through their own creativity, which I hope is understood that is much more complex than just essentially having a well-oiled machine. And this exhibition piece of nature, nurture, and chance will show you that obviously we are all extremely different. Even twins are very, very different, and thus we know that human-centeredness is going into the realm of complexity simply because each human is the source or the outcome of complexity. And kind of I want to end kind of like with the core of the Ocmaya project is that most of the paradigms are inappropriate for complex challenges. So people tend to oversimplify things when they're not experts on something. Like in climate change, I have heard all kinds of oversimplified reasons why climate change doesn't exist. Sometimes with one variable views, like just essentially stating that the percentage of CO2 that humans place on the air is not the same as from nature. Thus, there can't be any any increased greenhouse effect. And all kinds of say, well, today is very cold in my town, and my town, the winter was colder, so thus then the entire world cannot be hotter. This is obviously in many senses also a part of some kind of orchestrated propaganda, which we must say exists. And this begs the point, right? So if we could actually achieve a paradigm that acknowledges complexity everywhere, right? So where we just don't say, well, the human being is only complex if you have to manage 1,000 human beings, but if not, then the tasks should be very clear. And again, one thing like climate is not going to be very important, or it's not so difficult because, I mean, at the end it's just CO2, right? And that's the point. So there are many points of inaccurate interpretations that are very obvious, like flat earthers. It's something that we must say, is a wildly inaccurate and way oversimplified interpretation of the world based on our experiences, if you will, of our misguided experiences. But this goes to the Ocmaya project again. So the idea is the more people that understand complexity, that understand all of these, that all of these scientific and ideas that are one variable or that focus only on nature or nurture are not going to be sufficient to be up to the task of a complex challenge. And this goes to all of the world's problems, including food insecurity and famine, which are not going to be solved by some kind of lazy compromises or some kind of redirection of resources. It can only be solved with an understanding of the complexity of the problem. And sadly, this is why Ocmaya exists. In the end, it's about being able to acknowledge this complexity, and this can only be done when we actually have this next frontier, right? So the next scientific frontier, which is actually not only conquering complexity, but bringing it to the masses and being able to collectively improve our world.